That day was one of the craziest and most arousing days of my life. It all started a few months ago in a suburban house outside of Chicago. The house was quiet, silence clinging to the walls, covering everything in stillness. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, every hour felt like two. I just wanted to collapse on my bed, my feet aching, my head pounding. The thought of my pillow was my only motivation. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, kicked off my shoes, and sighed in relief. But as I walked past the hallway, I stopped short. Light seeped through the crack of the living room door, catching my attention. Uncle Mark. I had completely forgotten he was here. He said he'd stop by the beginning of the week, but I didn't expect it to be today. Uncle Mark was the kind of person who was always on the go, never staying in one place for long. He was charming, quick to smile, his laughter filling the room. And even though he was my uncle, there was always something about him that made people look longer. Maybe it was his confidence, or the way he carried himself, but he had an undeniable energy. I stood in the hallway, hesitating. Should I knock and see if he's awake, or just go to sleep? But curiosity won. The light under the door wasn't too bright. Probably just a night light. He might already be asleep. I decided to peek in to make sure everything was okay before heading to my room. I pushed the door open gently, the hinges creaking softly in the silence. But he didn't move. I stepped inside. Soft, warm light filled the room. And there he was, reclining on the bed, not under the covers, his hand resting across his chest. I froze, my heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat as I took in the scene before me. Uncle Mark's shirt was askew, pulled up, revealing a glimpse of his toned stomach. His jeans were unbuttoned and riding low. But that wasn't all. His hand rested casually on his thigh. And looking down, I gasped inwardly. He was asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. But his jeans were unzipped halfway, the waistband of his underwear peeking out. The top buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing his collarbone in the soft light. And there, standing out clearly, was the bulge in his underwear. I should have looked away, pretended I didn't see anything. But I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't dare acknowledge. I had never seen Uncle Mark like this before. But suddenly, I found him incredibly attractive. He was vulnerable, unaware, stirring something within me that I didn't understand, but couldn't ignore. I moved closer, slowly, hesitantly. His face was turned to the side, serene, unaware of my presence. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe evenly. But the closer I got, the harder it was to resist the pull. What was I doing? My reason screamed at me to stop, to leave, but curiosity and desire drowned it out. I had never thought of Uncle Mark this way. He was family. This was wrong. But the light brushed across his skin. His body relaxed on the bed. I couldn't look away. I knelt beside the bed, my hand trembling as I reached out to lightly touch the exposed skin of his stomach. It was a feather-light touch, but it jolted me like an electric shock. I held my breath, afraid of waking him, but he didn't stir. Emboldened, I let my hand slide up his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't think straight. What was I doing? This was insane. But I didn't stop. Didn't want to stop. I leaned closer, the faint scent of his cologne filling the space between us. I looked at his face, his strong jawline, the stubble on his cheeks. He was peaceful, oblivious. Uncle Mark, I whispered, my voice barely audible in the quiet room. He didn't answer, his breathing even, his lips slightly parted in his sleep. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and before I could stop myself, I lightly kissed his hand. My lips brushed against his warm fingers, sending shivers down my spine. My heart raced, uncontrollable thoughts swirling through my mind. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. My lips trailed up his arm, pressing soft, increasingly bolder kisses against his smooth, warm skin. His cologne was intoxicating, my pulse quickening, my chest tightening as I leaned closer to his neck. Then, he stirred, a soft moan escaping his lips. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I stared at him, terrified he'd wake up, open his eyes, and see me so close. But he just sighed and relaxed. I exhaled slowly in relief. I should have stopped, left before I went too far. But I couldn't. I was trapped in the moment, consumed by a strange, overwhelming need. But it wasn't over yet. I should leave the room. The thought echoed in my head. But my body wouldn't obey. I was too close, too deep in the moment to turn back. My reason screamed at me to leave. But something primal kept me rooted to the spot. My hand lingered on his arm, tracing the curve of his bicep. I felt the steady rhythm of his pulse, making my own heart beat faster. He stirred again, and I held my breath. But he didn't wake up. I hesitated, my hand hovering over his chest. My mind a whirlwind of desire and confusion. What was I doing? This was so wrong, but the pull was irresistible. Even though he was completely unaware. He moaned softly in his sleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. I bit my lip, my eyes drawn to the half-unbuttoned jeans. I couldn't look away. My hand moved automatically, touching the edge of his jeans where the zipper was partially undone. Feeling the soft fabric beneath my fingertips, I felt the warmth of his skin underneath. My heart pounded as I slid my hand along the edge of his jeans. Right above his underwear, I glanced at his face, terrified he'd wake up and catch me. But his eyes were closed. His breathing even. He was fast asleep, unaware of what I was doing. But the way his body was reacting, the slight movements, the soft sounds, made me feel like he knew. On some level, like he was waiting for this. I leaned closer, my breath short and shallow. The room growing hotter, the air thick with tension. I couldn't think straight as my hand touched the edge of his underwear. I hesitated. My reason screamed at me to stop. But my body wouldn't obey. "Uncle Mark," I whispered again, my voice barely audible. He stirred, his lips parting, but he didn't wake up. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and slowly, my hand slipped beneath the edge of his underwear. The warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips sent shivers down my spine. I gasped for breath. I knew this was wrong. But his reaction, his chest rising and falling in time with my actions, kept me from stopping. Something was drawing me in, pulling me closer, even as everything told me to run. My hand stopped there, beneath the edge of his underwear, feeling the warmth of his skin, his pulse throbbing close and intensely. I should pull my hand away, but I couldn't. My hand slid lower, touching the edge of his underwear, the thin fabric doing little to conceal the hardness beneath. My heart pounded, my mind a chaotic mess. And before I could stop myself, I leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to his skin, right above the edge of his underwear. The scent of his cologne mixed with his warm, familiar scent sent me spiraling. Then, I jumped. He shifted more forcefully, moaning softly. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought he was going to wake up, open his eyes, and see me. Panic surged through me, but before I could pull my hand away, his hand moved, touching my arm lightly. It shocked me like an electric jolt. I looked at him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. His hand slid up my arm, lightly but firmly. His eyes were barely open, and he seemed confused, as if trying to piece something together. Then, his eyes locked onto mine, his expression changing. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice rough, still thick with sleep, but laced with something dangerous. His hand slid up the back of my neck, pulling me closer. "What are you doing?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight, unable to speak. I was trapped in his gaze, his hand tightening slightly on my neck. My reason screamed at me to apologize, to stand up, to run, but I couldn't move. I was stuck in the way his eyes darkened as he looked down at my hand. "Do you know what you're doing to me?" he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. His hand slid down my waist, gripping firmly but not tightly. The mixture of disappointment and desire in his voice made me tremble. I stammered, my face burning hot. I should have pulled my hand away, apologized, but the words wouldn't come. I was too close, too caught up to think clearly. His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me closer until we were almost touching. "You don't have to stop," he whispered, his voice softer, but still insistent. "If you want to." My heart leapt into my throat, conflicting emotions flooding through me, fear, desire, confusion, the knowledge that this was wrong. But his gaze, the way his hand lingered on my skin, made it impossible to think. I looked at him, my voice trembling. I don't know what I want." His eyes softened, but the tension didn't disappear. "I think you do," he said softly, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb stroking gently. "You just have to let yourself feel it." His words echoed in my head, breaking down the last of my control. "You just have to let yourself feel it." I wasn't sure what I was feeling, desire, fear, or something more complex. All I knew was that I couldn't move. His hand lingered on my cheek, his thumb stroking slowly, awakening every nerve ending. I wanted to pull away, to break the tension, but I couldn't speak. I sat there, my breath coming in short gasps, my heart pounding, waiting for him to make a move. His other hand slid from my waist to my thigh, gently caressing me through my jeans, sending heat coursing through my body. I couldn't ignore it. I bit my lip, emotions swirling within me. His eyes never left mine, growing more intense with each passing second. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice filling the space between us. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Afraid wasn't enough to describe what I was feeling. Scared, yes, but there was something else, too, something I didn't want to admit. I was drawn to him, to the way his hand felt, to the way he looked at me, like I was everything. It was intoxicating, dangerous, irresistible. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice small amidst the turmoil within me. But I trusted Uncle Mark. His hand slid up the back of my neck, pulling me closer. His warm breath tickled my ear. "You don't have to do anything," he whispered, his lips brushing against my ear. "Let me take care of it." My heart skipped a beat. A fleeting thought of pulling away, of stopping before things went too far, crossed my mind, but before I could decide, his hand cupped my face, tilting my head towards him. His lips were close, just a breath away. The warmth radiating from him pulled me in like gravity. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding. I knew this was wrong, but the desire was stronger than my reason. His breath warmed my lips, and the world around me dissolved. All that remained were us, in this dangerous, unavoidable moment. Then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss against his lips. It was hesitant at first, like an experiment, but it didn't stay gentle for long. The moment our lips touched, something changed. It became darker, more ravenous. His hand tightened on my neck, pulling me closer, deepening the kiss. His lips moved against mine, hungry, demanding, catching me by surprise. I gasped, my hands clutching at his shirt as he pulled me closer. His warm, solid body pressing against mine. The kiss consumed me, overwhelming me. The tension exploded like a wildfire. Out of control, my reason screamed at me to stop, but my body wouldn't obey. His hands were everywhere, on my waist, my back, pulling me closer, touching me, making me burn. I felt his body pressing against mine, fueling a desire that I couldn't ignore. "I've wanted this for so long," he whispered against my lips, his voice rough with need. His words sent shivers down my spine. "I've wanted this." I couldn't believe it. He had thought about me like this? It wasn't just a moment of impulsive desire. He wanted me, and now, it was clear he wasn't going to stop unless I told him to. But I didn't want to stop. I leaned into the kiss, my hands sliding up his shoulders, pulling him closer. His body tensed, the muscles beneath my fingertips hard and rigid. The desire flared. His kisses grew more frantic, as if he had been holding back for too long. And now he was crossing the line of no return. His hand slid down my hips, gripping tightly, pulling me up onto the bed beside him. The movement was quick, decisive. I lay beside him, his body pressing close, the heat between us reaching a fever pitch. He kissed me again, more forcefully, his hands roaming over my body with a hunger that made me dizzy. My heart pounded, my mind a chaotic mess. I couldn't control what was happening. This was really happening, and no matter where it led, I didn't want to stop. "Tell me you want this," he whispered against my lips, his hands sliding beneath my shirt, his fingers stroking my skin. "Say it." I swallowed hard, my breath coming in ragged gasps as his hand slid higher, caressing my chest. What did I want? My body was screaming yes, but conflicting emotions were overwhelming me: guilt, fear, desire. At that moment, nothing else mattered, except for his gaze, his touch, his voice that made my heart skip a beat. He moaned softly, his hand tightening, kissing me again, his lips trailing down my neck, leaving a trail of intense heat. Too fast, too soon, but I didn't stop. I arched into his touch, lost in the moment. "Say you want me," he whispered, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. His hand slid down my stomach, his fingers grazing the edge of my jeans. Waiting for my consent, I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. What did I want? My body was screaming yes, I couldn't deny the way I was responding. The quickening of my pulse with every kiss. Conflicting emotions were overwhelming me: guilt, fear, desire. I couldn't sort them out. At that moment, nothing else mattered except him, his gaze, his touch, his voice. "I want you," I whispered, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. And as I said them, I knew there was no turning back. My hands slid across his back, feeling the taut muscles beneath his shirt, tensing and releasing with each movement, like we were caught in a storm. Unstoppable, unrelenting. I gasped for breath, arching into him, my body craving more. I didn't think, didn't breathe, I just felt. I was breathing fast, my hips arching instinctively as his hand moved with purpose. Waves of pleasure coursed through me, blurring my mind. I couldn't think, I just had him, the heat of his body pressing against mine. "Uncle Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling, as his movements grew more insistent, more demanding. I didn't know how much longer I could take. He kissed me, his lips hungry on mine. I responded with equal fervor, my hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer, erasing the last bit of space between us. The heat between us was unbearable, the tension thick and suffocating. But I didn't want to stop. I wanted this, to be close to him. He wanted this, had wanted this for so long. He whispered something against my lips, his voice rough with need. His words sent shivers down my spine. He had wanted me for so long. The thought made my pulse race, my desire burn hotter. My mind was blurring, my body trembling with need. I didn't know how much longer I could take. But suddenly, the moment shattered. The sound of the door creaking open made us both freeze. Uncle Mark recoiled, his breath coming in short gasps, his eyes darting to the door for a split second. We didn't move, the tension replaced by panic. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart pounding. He shook his head, his hand still on my waist. But the fire in his eyes had died, replaced by something darker. He didn't know. The silence was stifling, as if the reality of what we had been doing was crashing down around us. This was wrong, so wrong, and now someone might have heard. Someone might know. The silence stretched on, endless, my heart pounding, terrified of getting caught. His hand lingered on my waist, warm, but now tense. The fire had turned to ice. Desire replaced by panic and guilt. We stood frozen for a few seconds, listening. Nothing, no more sounds, no footsteps. Maybe it was nothing, but the thought that someone knew was enough to shatter everything. Uncle Mark recoiled, his breathing labored, his hand running through his hair, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. "I can't do this," he mumbled, as if talking to himself. "This is wrong." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. The weight of what we had been doing crashed down on me. This was wrong. We knew it, but we had still let it happen. Desire and tension had clouded our judgment. And now, all that was left was the aftermath. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for getting caught up in the moment, for going too far, or for wanting him in the first place. Maybe it was all of it. He stood up and began pacing back and forth, running a hand over his face as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. "This isn't your fault," he said, his voice strained and disappointed. "It's my fault. I should have stopped." He paused, shaking his head, his eyes filled with regret. The room grew colder, the intimacy vanishing, replaced by guilt and confusion. I pulled my shirt back on, my hands trembling, trying to process everything that had just happened. What did this mean for us? For our family? Maybe we can just forget this ever happened, I said softly, my voice small. Pretend it never happened. It sounded impossible. But what other choice did we have? We couldn't undo it. We couldn't erase it. But maybe we could try to move on, pretending everything was normal. He stopped pacing, turning his back to me and looking at the door. "Yeah," he mumbled, his voice unconvincing. "Maybe that's for the best." We both knew it wasn't true. We couldn't forget it. It would hang between us, unsaid, but always there, no matter how normal we tried to act. I stood up, my legs shaky, unsure. I should go," I said, my throat tightening, the weight of everything crushing me. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. He turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he would try to stop me. But he just nodded. "Yeah," he said softly, "maybe you should." I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. My heart was pounding, my mind a chaotic mess. I needed to escape his gaze. The reality of what we had just done. I walked to the door, my hand reaching for the knob. But before I could open it, I hesitated. "Uncle Mark," I whispered, glancing back at him. His eyes were filled with guilt, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. He was silent for a long moment, and I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know," he said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "I don't know what to think right now." His words hung in the air between us. I nodded, understanding. I didn't know what to think either. It was too much, too overwhelming. I couldn't sort it out. I opened the door and stepped into the darkened hallway. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. My legs heavy, impossible to ignore. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. But now I had to. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided Uncle Mark as much as possible, staying out of the house or locked in my room, trying to sort out my feelings from that night. Every time I thought about it, guilt and shame washed over me. But there was something else, too, something I didn't want to admit. I missed him. It was wrong. I couldn't be near him. But I missed the closeness of that night. Not just the physical stuff. There was something deeper, that had opened a door between us that I didn't know existed. And now that it was open, I couldn't close it. But no matter how much I missed him, I knew I couldn't go back. I had to move on, pretending it hadn't happened. For my family, for myself. A few days later, Uncle Mark left. He didn't say goodbye to me. I heard the door close early in the morning. The sound of his car starting as he drove away, leaving quietly, but rightfully. There was nothing left to say. The house felt empty without him. The silence stifling. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where he had been just days before, wondering if things could ever go back to normal. Probably not. That night had changed everything. But now, I could only try to forget, even if I didn't want to.